LaMelo Ball, Sabonis, and today's Locked On Pelicans. I'll tell you the scenarios and the players where I would be okay with the Pelicans trading their first round pick. Plus a whole bunch of draft talk in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday, and we are going to talk draft and trading a draft pick, but also looking at guys they would draft. We got a whole lot to cover in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Who are the players that I'm okay with them trading their first round pick for this year? If they fall to 6, who do we look at them taking outside that kind of top 4 guys out there? And they're going to need a point guard. So we're going to look at some point guard stopgaps here. It's actually a mailbag episode of Locked On Pelicans. So thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. By the way, don't forget about the Locked On Pelicans daily newsletter. I'm going to tell you in a little bit about ways where you can win some big prizes by just subscribing. But if you want to subscribe right now, you'll be entered into those. Just go to lockedondaily.com. So as I clear my voice here, let's get into this one. A mailbag episode of Locked On Pelicans. I asked for your questions. Y'all delivered. We got some great ones here that all kind of tie in together. So Eric Ram, newest Hornet 233 says, if we get a lottery pick, not number 1, do we keep it or make a big splash in the offseason? So this is basically, do you trade the pick if you don't land number 1? And I'll say this, if you land in the top 2, top 3, top 4, I'm not sure you trade that pick no matter what. I think that's where the real top part of the draft is. Cooper Flagg's in his tier by himself. I think the 2 Rutger players in Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey are tier 2. I would put VJ Edgecombe and maybe 1 or 2 other guys in that kind of tier 3 there. That's where I feel kind of comfortable trading the draft pick, but not for the top 3, certainly. Even if I'm not the biggest Ace Bailey fan in terms of fit or building around a player like that, the talent is too good. But there are some players that if we're on available for New Orleans, I'd be like, yeah, you got to move for those guys. And so let's look at who those players are. And I'm going to remove some that I don't think are like realistic or make a ton of sense. Like I, was thinking about adding Jabari Smith Jr. from the Houston Rockets on this, but not for the 4th overall pick. And also Houston's not trading for the 6th overall pick in this draft. They just don't have a need for that. So you've got to kind of find the right team that makes sense in what they'd be giving up and what they'd be getting back, with the centerpiece being, say, the 6th overall pick. That's what we're going to use here when it comes to it. So the first and foremost player is Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz. They've been tanking for a reason. They've wasted now 2 years of his prime in his career. He might like it in Utah, but if they felt they could build around him and truthfully have him be the guy, you'd be going for it right now. And so I think that opens the door for maybe the 6th overall pick being traded to Utah, particularly if they don't end up with the number 1 overall pick, or even if they do, because they've been tanking hard for it all season long. Maybe you want to get someone to pair with Cooper Flagg, and that gives you an intentional rebuild there and not retool where it's like, now that we got Cooper Flagg and Lauri Markkanen, we'll go for the playoffs next year, because the rest of their roster is kind of weird. So you're going to end up with, say they get the number 1 overall pick, a player that's just not on the same timeline as Lauri Markkanen. So I think that opens up to him being moved too. So 6th overall pick for Lauri Markkanen, sure, like that idea. We're going to take a high-level overview of this. We'll do shows in the offseason on all of these players in particular too, and we can then figure out the nitty-gritty details of the trade. But let's say it's the 6th overall pick salary filler for Markkanen, right? The next guy that I would significantly make a move for, or really, really consider, would be LaMelo Ball. Charlotte is in a weird spot where they've had a ton of injuries to. They haven't had any sort of postseason success or even a trip in LaMelo Ball's tenure. It's just not good there. And is it going to turn around anytime soon? So to pair Zion Williamson with a guard of LaMelo Ball's caliber is a pretty exciting idea. This is someone who has elite vision. He's a very good shooter, and it would just add a dimension to the Pelicans that they have not had with Zion Williamson. So I love the idea of LaMelo Ball. So the 6th overall pick for him, like, yeah, absolutely. It'd take more than that. It would take more than that for Markkanen too. But I think this is the starting point of a deal that could really work. And if you could maybe move DeJounte Murray in the 6th overall pick for LaMelo Ball, it fixes some of your salary cap problems too with a player that's not going to be playing. That's rather appealing to me when it comes down to it. I think the best player they could go and get, there's issues with LaMelo Ball too, right? Like, the injuries have been pretty significant in keeping him off the court. And do you want to pair that with, I don't even want to say Zion Williamson, I just want to say this Pelicans team in general? Like, are you comfortable trading the 6th overall pick? And we'll get into guys that they could take at 6 in the next segment here for an injury-prone player. And that, there's some red flags there, y'all. Like, there's some reason to be concerned about that sort of thing. I think you could also call up the Sacramento Kings and ask him about Domantas Sabonis. There's been some rumors out there that he wants to know what this direction is for the Sacramento Kings because they've seemed a little bit directionless this year, trading away De'Aaron Fox, reuniting Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan, and it's not working out for them. They fired their head coach, elevated Doug Christie. None of that is particularly working for them at this time. So do they want to make a move there, or does Sabonis want out? And when you look at a big man to play center to fit next to Zion Williamson, Sabonis is it, right? Like, that's one of the things here. Like, this guy is absolutely the type of player that fits well next to Zion. He can be a good defender at times. He passes the ball, he rebounds, he shoots really well. Like, it's that kind of unicorn center that you've needed next to Zion Williamson that they just haven't been able to find. And that would maybe unlock Zion and the team even a little bit more. So I'm excited about what that would look like here. And you give them kind of a jump start on a rebuild as well. Maybe they look to flip Zach LaVine later, DeMar DeRozan, but you're not going to get anywhere with that. The Kings, rather than kind of being stuck in that purgatory of maybe you're in the play-in tournament, maybe not. If you give them a direction, it's something that we talked about in yesterday's episode of Locked On Pelicans of pick a direction and go with it. Look, I'm going to throw one more out there, and I saved this one for last. I didn't even tease it here. Kevin Durant could be an option. Kevin Durant very much could be an option, I think. Not that he would necessarily want to come here, because I'm almost certain he wouldn't, but it would make some sense. Any of those other teams in the top 5 probably aren't trading for Kevin Durant at this point in time, just kind of given where they are and what that would look like. If it was Utah, Washington, Charlotte, New Orleans, and let's say Brooklyn jumps up in there somewhere and it pushes New Orleans down to 5 or 6, something along those lines, those are the teams that aren't going to be interested in Kevin Durant. It would be a team like the Pelicans are. Could you give the Phoenix Suns a slight jump on a rebuild? They're in a bad situation. I don't think they're going to get as much as they are expecting for Kevin Durant, and they gave up a lot for him. There's going to be some bigger questions there, especially if they miss the playoffs this year, of what's that team going to look like. But could you move the 6th overall pick and maybe CJ McCollum for Kevin Durant? And I think the answer to that could be potentially yes. And while Durant's old, look, if you're trying to just go for it, send it, go for it, that's the move. Especially if you can get away with not giving up a Herb Jones or Trey Murphy III for him. That's the type of move that I would be looking to do. So maybe it's CJ McCollum and a pick or 2 picks for Kevin Durant. There's an option there that keeps the Phoenix Suns a little bit more competitive than they've been in other ways, or than they could be, while getting a rebuilding piece to kind of bridge that gap for the future that they are lacking here. Those are the names that I would be willing to trade this pick for, but there's not more than that, really. Those are the guys, and I'd still need to think long and hard about it on almost every single one, other than maybe Sabonis, because otherwise the Pelicans, if it doesn't work out, are kind of trapping themselves to that purgatory, that middle. We said picking a direction is a rather important thing, and getting out of that area is a rather important thing. What do you think about those names? What do you think a trade would be? Let me know in the comments down below. So coming up next, say they fall and can't trade the pick or don't want to trade the pick. Say they're 6 overall. Who's the player that the Pelicans are eyeing, and how it might change depending on what happens in free agency too? We're going to break that down coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. So with Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. So the new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national savings average. Account interest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. I got the newsletter giveaway here for you. Look, the playoffs are out of reach for the Pelicans, but this offseason is going to be really pivotal, whether it's the draft, whether it's free agency, just the future of Zion Williamson. So stay updated on all the offseason news, draft coverage, and expert analysis by subscribing to the Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Plus, you could win big by subscribing. Subscribe between April 7th, 2025 and April 30th, 2025 for your chance to win one of these amazing prizes. A $2,500 Best Buy gift card to upgrade your home theater, a $300 Game Time gift card to buy tickets to a future game, and a $200 Fanatics gift card for a jersey. So get exclusive insight into free agency, draft coverage, and team updates delivered straight to your inbox. Join the Locked On Pelicans, the Locked On podcast, Locked On Pelicans newsletter for trusted coverage every day. Subscribe to enter today by clicking the link in the description, or just go to lockedondaily.com. All right, let's answer another question here. And he had to know I was going to do this one. This one comes from John Burrows at Burrows Report, who, by the way, covers Tulane in a variety of different ways, including Tulane on SI, so Roll Wave and the Fear the Wave collective here. And his question is, if the Pelicans get the 6th pick, who are the names fans should get familiar with? Flag at 1 is always the dream, but more realistically, I'd be thrilled with a guy like Tre Johnson, who's already capable of creating his own shot. So this question is going to tie into the next section, or the next segment of Locked On Pelicans too, because I think they're a little bit tied together, and that might depend on what the Pelicans feel they can do in free agency. Look, if you're drafting in the lottery, you often 90% of the time, I would say, go best player available. So you've got your draft board, and you don't draft for fit, you draft for talent. Best player available. It's really as simple as that, I think. And I don't disagree with that strategy for the most part. But if New Orleans is like, we want to make the playoffs next year, you need less of a developmental guy and a guy that's slightly more ready to play right now or has his skills more refined. So you're picking a higher floor and only potentially, a lower ceiling. So there are certain players that I think kind of fit into that mix of would be able to contribute right away. And I think Tre Johnson is absolutely one of them. He's a little bit one-dimensional in my opinion, but this is someone who adds three-point shooting and works well off ball for you. Look, he's one-dimensional as in this dude can score, but at 20.1 points per game on almost 40% shooting from 3, I'm paying attention to that. You know, that's the type of player that with a tireless motor that he has fits around Zion Williamson. He's plug and play ready in what this team is going to be doing next year and can even be kind of your go-to guy off the bench in terms of scoring. His shot making is very incredible. He's got a very good handle that allows him to move around, and he works well off ball. This guy runs through every type of screen, relocates well after passing. You like that sort of thing. You know, he's been played as a little bit more of a lead guard, point guard this year too. So there's potential for him to grow into that lead guard role as well. There's no defense from him. He's going to get picked on defensively, I think, as well, and doesn't finish, at the rim particularly well either. So it makes him as a scorer a little bit more one-dimensional of a score. It's kind of like what they looked at when they drafted Jordan Hawkins. So he kind of fits that same mold, but I think is probably going to be better overall. But if you have Jordan Hawkins, do you go with someone like that? Or does that mean you're giving up on Jordan Hawkins. So I think with that in mind, they could go in a different direction. You have Kasparas Yakichonis out of Illinois, who could be your lead point guard for you. And there's been a very clear demonstrable need for that. But, and we're going to look at point guard stopgaps in the next segment here, you are going to get a guy like DeJounte Murray back. They're likely going to sign some sort of point guard this offseason, whether it's Chris Paul or Elfrid Payton. We'll look at them in the next segment here. You know, all of a sudden, that's a lot invested in one position if you go with Yakichonis to kind of be that point guard for you. You could look at someone like Con Knipple, who I think is going to be really, really good out of Duke, as he's a very good off-ball player. He's definitely a three-point shooter. He has very good size on the wing at 6'7", and decent enough athleticism that I don't think he is going to be like a huge liability on the defensive side of the ball, but he does a lot. And he also can be a little bit of a lead guard and do some of that pick and roll and everything for you. So that I do find to be something that is really important for this team. And the fact that he can operate in the pick and roll and is such a good shooter, pairing him with someone like Zion Williamson makes a lot of sense here. You know, someone else that I've really come to like in this draft is Jeremiah Fears out of Oklahoma. And we did a whole segment on him the other day after he declared, right? Like, this is a downhill kind of guard that also has some decent shooting ability in him. As a combo guard, though, they need that kind of other dimension of a player that's downhill, that's attacking. That's not something that they have really had in the guard position for a little while here. You're going to notice I'm leaving out the two big men that would be in this range, right? There's Derek Queen and there's Kaman Malawach. And I think both could work. Malawach, I think, is a little bit more raw, and you drafted Yves Missi last year. That kind of fits a similar mold. But I think as a rim protector, Malawach is going to be significantly better than Missi will be. But Derek Queen is the kind of like Naz Reid type player that this team has needed too. So if you know that you are going to end up signing an Elfrid Payton or Chris Paul, maybe you go with one of the bigs in this direction here. You know, Derek Queen has done a good job of rebounding. His three-point shooting can definitely be good. He hit one of like the bigger shots of the tournament, which was fun to watch as well. So there's a lot of upside with him. I think it's going to take a little bit for him to come along. And look, I even did a show of like, I don't know if I fully see it here because of some of the lack of effort and limited athleticism that he has. But overall, like, that is the type of player that if you know you're going to take a guard in free agency or somewhere else to kind of be a stopgap point guard for you, maybe don't, you know, invest in a Yakichonis or a Jeremiah Fears or even a Tre Johnson in that sense, unless you're looking for them to do different things. So if the Pelicans do fall to 6, though, I think like the world opens up here for that team, and they can do a variety of different things that really, you know, has a couple of different dimensions for him. And all of a sudden, all options are on the table, potentially including, as we just talked about, trading that pick. So when they get to, if they fall to 6, which we hope doesn't happen, that's when things start to get pretty interesting with this team. So we just mentioned the kind of point guard stuff. They need another one of those, and maybe they get it in the draft, but rookie point guards aren't probably going to be making the biggest impact at the NBA level here. Let's look at a couple of other options and stopgaps that I think could be smart for New Orleans to explore and also just be kind of cool. We're talking Chris Paul, Elfrid Payton, some others. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by BetterHelp. Taking care of your mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical health, but traditional in-person therapy can be expensive, often ranging from $100 to $250 per session. So that's where BetterHelp comes in. With online therapy, you get quality care at a price that makes sense, saving you both time and money. And look, therapy isn't just for life's toughest moments. It can help with everyday stress, learning how to set boundaries, develop positive coping skills, or maybe just communicating with your partner a little bit better and letting you show up for them in the best way possible. So having access to support when you need it can make a really big difference. I've used BetterHelp before. I don't have time to go drive to an office, to wait, to sit down, drive home, all of that. Being able to just hop on my computer, my phone, my tablet to be able to have my session and get the help I need is really great. So your well-being is worth it. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Don't forget about the free daily Locked On Pelicans newsletter and all those prizes that you could win by just subscribing. That's all you have to do. And make Locked On Saints your second listen today. It's just fun over there. Is it Shedeur Sanders? I'm getting real excited about him being the 9th overall pick and coming to New Orleans. So I hope that ends up being the case. There's also the Saints Squad show that they've just introduced, kind of a roundtable show a couple times a week. That's really awesome. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go subscribe to Locked On Saints. Make them your second listen today. So let's look at point guard options for the New Orleans Pelicans, because that's a need for them. And there's two questions that I want to answer here. And this one comes from Mark Woods at MW Woods Jr. Since DeJounte Murray will not come back until 2026, we don't know that for sure. Should the Pelicans give Elfrid Payton a minimum contract? And if they do, does that possibly make Jose Alvarado expendable, depending on how free agency and the draft goes? Where is the other question here that I wanted to answer as well? And I'm missing it as I try and scroll. Someone asked me, should they bring Chris Paul back? And that was essentially, here it is. King210, Terrell to Rhyme. What do you think about the Pelicans signing CP3 in the offseason? I think he can help the team. The answer to both those is, yeah, either one. I'm cool with either one. Elfrid Payton would certainly be cheaper, but I don't think Chris Paul is going to be a horrifically expensive player for New Orleans either. But he is going to be looking for a full mid-level exception deal. That's the contract that he is on right now with the San Antonio Spurs, I believe. Let me pull up what his deal looks like. I think it was a 1 year, full mid-level exception deal. So $10 million, something in that range here. Let's see. Yeah, 10.4. So he signed a 1 year, $11 million contract. Basically the mid-level exception contract to go with the Phoenix Suns, the San Antonio Spurs, and pair him with Victor Wembanyama this year. And look, Chris Paul has been good, and what's incredible is he's played in every single game this season. 8.8 points per game, 7.6 assists. He's given you 1.3 steals and 3.6 rebounds while shooting almost 38% from three on about 4.5 attempts per game. Yeah, sign me up for that. Sign me up for that. The problem is, are they going to be truly able to afford him? And I think that's a little bit of an open question right now that we don't fully know. So I think when you look at that, I like the idea of Chris Paul. If he knows, as I knock things over here, that it's going to be the last year of his career, it's let me go back to New Orleans where it all started. And he's openly spoke about this, a ton of love for the city still as well. He's got a lot of just family roots here from his time here. If that's the case and he wants to come back for 1 or 2 years before he ends up retiring, yeah, I'm all for it, right? He's going to be 40 this season. Next season, it's right around the corner, basically. He'll be 40 next year. So if he wants that kind of 1 year, not guaranteed to be a starter, but will be a starter at times just because of the injuries that happen and all of that, I think that would be a great move for him and for New Orleans as a mini reunion of sorts that would be a lot of fun, but also as a player in a limited role that would give this team what they need. I think Elfrid Payton is a cheaper option too. Look, it's a great story and he just delivers, right? He has gotten 4 starts here, played 14 games for New Orleans so far. He's given you 5 points and 7.5 assists per. The problem is he doesn't shoot threes really, but in terms of just looking for others, trying to set others up, yeah, absolutely. He makes a ton of sense. It's just kind of the cheap option. I don't know if either guy would necessarily make Jose Alvarado expendable, and we love Jose Alvarado here, but I get it, right? You could maybe then move Jose Alvarado for a pick, and the Milwaukee Bucks were really interested in trading for him at the trade deadline. If you can get some value from him, knowing that you are signing Chris Paul, maybe you're drafting a guard too, moving on from Jose Alvarado, all of a sudden you've kind of managed your assets pretty well, and that's not a bad thing for the team to do. So a point guard stopgap, I think, makes a lot of sense. I think the idea of Chris Paul is probably my favorite of these. But if he wants like a $5 million deal, like maybe they can make that work. But things in terms of salary cap are going to get pretty tight. And I don't think they'd really have the option to give him that kind of like 10 million full mid-level exception deal that he's maybe looking for. And, maybe the San Antonio Spurs want to keep him, knowing that next year is likely the year that they're going to be looking to make that sort of playoff push when it comes to everything. But there are some definitely like interesting options for the team. Look, there's also a guy like Tyus Jones, I think, that you might be able to get. And he's been good and slightly underrated throughout his career, and he's on that kind of cheap prove it deal in Phoenix, but he's played a ton and he's given you 10.3 points per game along with 5.4 assists. But when he was with the Wizards last year, 7 assist guy per night, that was a career high for him by far, by the way. But he was being that good 6-man point guard for the Memphis Grizzlies for a couple years before that. And in Memphis, he averaged 4.5 assists, really kind of blossoming his final 2 years there and in the running for 6th man of the year. So he's someone that could start. He's someone that could come off the bench for you. Those are just useful things and flexibility to have with this team. So I think there are a ton of options potentially out there for the point guard position. But yeah, I absolutely love Chris Paul as an option for New Orleans. So enjoy the game tonight. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Be back with y'all tomorrow to recap the game, talk more draft, talk more trades. We got a whole lot to talk about here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast. Subscribe to the Locked On Pelicans newsletter over at LockedOnDaily.com. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. See y'all tomorrow.